So I don't want to skip over anybody else, but I want to bring Nick in and appreciate his time. Let me give you a little background. Nick and I have only conversed a few times, but I was so impressed by the presentation which he and his mentor colleague gave to us a few weeks ago. And Nick, I'll let you fill in a little bit more about that. Nick is a PhD student at FIU, Florida International University, and I'll let you fill in the right kind of details. But some of the correlation between our stories here and what Nick's going to share and what my family with Eddie come from, let me put some pieces together. My husband, Eddie, professionally for over 50 years, fished for bonefish in the Florida Keys, in this area in South Florida. That was his profession. And bonefish are a very specialized sport fish. It's all release. He specialized in fly fishing, very high tech. And I'll let Nick fill in a little bit more about that. But so one piece of this story is bonefish, and that speaks very strongly to the Whiteman family. Another piece of this conversation, of course, has to do with looking at the environment, looking at those of us here tonight have a common bond of having connected with the Shackley Company for various reasons. But one of the things that is a common bond for us is a commitment to being in harmony with nature, to using environmentally friendly products, making sure that that's a part of what we stand for. And so there's that piece. And then there's the third piece that Nick's going to bring in. And that is this whole thing, which I'll let you fill in the blanks, Nick, but the research project which he and one of his colleague mentors did, which I'll let you fill in, because I think it's I don't want to say any more, except that you will understand why I think this is such a powerful story. And the bottom line for all of us here business-wise is the word why. Why in the world do we do what we do? Well, a part of the reason we do what we do is to be able to educate people about some of the things that Nick will share. So with that introduction, Nick, thank you so much for taking a special evening and being with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was probably the best intro I've ever had. Good thing this is recorded to show this around. That was a good one. Good to meet everybody here briefly. About a couple of you guys. Really neat that we're chatting across the country right now. It's pretty cool. I didn't expect that, but that's the advent of everyone being remote these days. So as she mentioned, my name's Nick. So I'm from Florida. I grew up in Southwest Florida and fishing the Keys. So right now I'm a PhD candidate at FIU. And so I study fish ecology and ecotoxicology, so contaminants in the environment. I'm also a fishing guide in the Florida Keys as well. So trying to catch bonefish without 50 years of experience, and it's going okay. But let me show you guys some about our research. So let me see here. I'm gonna go ahead and share screens. So this is me with a bonefish. If anyone hasn't seen a bonefish before, this is one of many photos that you will see during this presentation. So I work with Florida International University and the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. And Bonefish and Tarpon Trust is a non-for-profit that works on protecting bonefish, tarpon, permit, and all of the habitats that support those fisheries and just coastal fisheries in general. And so my topic is the pharmaceutical threats to coastal habitats and fisheries. So realistically, the entire lens of this talk and my research is that of an aspect of water quality. And it's incredibly important for us here as Floridians. And we're speaking with people right now throughout the country. And I imagine you don't have Florida's coast, but you have plenty of water resources, I'm sure, that are very important, whether it be drinking water, whether it be for recreation, lakes, who knows what. But it's a very important thing for not just Floridians here. In Florida, recreational fishing has the highest economic impact in the United States. We have the most anglers and the best quality of fishing. So Florida leads the United States, as I mentioned, economic impact. The number of anglers, 36% of them are from the United States with 22 million fishing trips. And we have 15% of the world records. So we'll focus on South Florida, which is where I did my study on bonefish. And Florida Keys fishing is 837 million a year, and about 20% of everyone coming to the Keys is doing so to go fish. And then 60%, that's 20% of dollars, 60% of the tourists going to the Keys are there to fish. And in Florida Bay, so the Everglades, it's 439, and there's about 264,000 anglers annually. So quite a few people fishing and relying on the water quality. So aside from that, money is one thing, but a lot of us are here likely because not money when it comes to the environment, but more so identity, culture, and again, the economy. So when I think of water quality, I think of things that are visible. So you have an algae bloom, you could have runoff from construction. That list goes on. And what you see in the top right is Sanibel Island after releases from the Okeechobee Lake through the Caloosahatchee River. But then there's a new and emerging, what I would call invisible threat. So something that's not readily visible or apparent in the water, but it still is something of concern. And in our case, those are pharmaceuticals. So there's about 5,000 prescription medications. There are 300,000 or so over-the-counter medications. Those are less regulated, so data on that is a little bit harder to come by. But they're more than just drugs that we take. Unfortunately, they eventually can reach the aquatic environment and put these aquatic environments at risk. So in the United States, we love our drugs. We, as an American, an individual consumes about 18 30-day prescriptions a year, and that equates to 6.3 billion.
Wait a minute, stop. Say that again, please.
So both these figures are crazy, right? So 18 30-day prescriptions per person per year. And we're the best, 50% of world consumption of pharmaceuticals. So we're winning. We have 6.3 billion prescriptions 2020. That's $400 billion. And then we'll highlight Florida. That's third in the nation for prescriptions. So we love our drugs. Now, to put pharmaceutical production and consumption in relation to three other environmental things that we really understand and care about: atmospheric CO2, population, and chemical industry, the proportional change since 1970 far outpacing that of those other aforementioned environmental things. So the rate of production and release is significantly outpacing our ability to understand what it's doing to the environment and assess the safety. So to further extend that, we're exceeding the safe operating space for these novel entities. So we've gone beyond the operating space that is safe without an ability to understand what is exactly happening and how can we control it. Now, I mentioned that pharmaceuticals are pollutants, but how does this happen? So you take a drug, and let's say maybe 50% of it is excreted. In some cases, it's much less. In many cases, it's much more. And so once you excrete that drug, let's say it has in Florida 2 different pathways, either a septic system, and 1/3 of households are on septic. And that could be leaky, it could be failing, it could be old, not monitored, and then that inevitably could leak into a canal. And then 2/3 of homes are on sewer systems. These sewer systems could be very old. Some of ours in South Florida from the 60s, 50s. There could be leaks. And let's say it does make it through the wastewater treatment plants. They weren't designed to remove pharmaceuticals. This wasn't something in mind when we put these wastewater treatment plants into action. This is something that's new. So they do pass through untreated. And does it reach our coastal waters? So we down here have 4 different, let's say, outlets for that wastewater. It could be ocean outfall. We have quite a bit of that in Miami-Dade County. There's deep well injection, so that's about 1,800 to 3,000 feet, and then shallow well, which is just below the surface, oftentimes like 60 feet or so. Then there's reclaimed water, reused water that's not fully treated, so we're not supposed to drink that. And these all can contain drugs, because let's think about they're all coming from the same source that's not able to remove them. So we inject the largest volume in the United States of deep well injection, and we presume that there's confinement, but there's no monitoring and the fate is unknown. And at the injection depth, there's evidence of connectivity with the Florida Straits. So if you go from where the Florida Straits are, so let's say where that plate is, the drop off, at that level, it's like, like 2,000 feet deep, has the same water signature as the water in our aquifers where the water is being injected. So that suggests connectivity from where we're injecting our wastewater to the ocean. And in Florida, it sounds 3,000 feet as far. It realistically isn't. That could be within 10, 5, whatever miles, very close to the coast. In Key West, all of the water, for the most part, deep well injection, and in Marathon. So then in Marathon, we have shallow well injection, and there's high connectivity between the surface and the injected waters. One study found that the water that's injected can reach the surface at about 75 feet per hour. So that realistically could be water that's injected is back to the surface within 1 hour. And the idea being there is like, okay, if it's injected and then let's say it is leaching back to the surface, that it would be treated, but 1 hour is not a lot of time for things to be removed. So they reach our waters and they inevitably can become contaminants there. Now, 4 things to think about with drugs is that there could be a persistent and constant supply if they are continuously being introduced into the environment. We don't have regulations for disposal or allowable amounts in the environment. And drugs, we might be finding them at very low concentrations, but they're designed to have an effect at a low dose. You just think about, you don't want to eat a bucket full of pills to actually have something happen. So the drugs are designed to do something at very small concentrations. And these are human drugs. You might be like, well, what does it matter to these animals, particularly fish that I study? Fish, interestingly enough, share about 70% of the same drug targets that human drugs are designed to actually interact with. So they have the machinery for something actually to happen. Now, they have effects on fish, and they can affect all aspects of life. So it's not killing them, but it's altering their behaviors. And these behaviors are very important because they affect survival, reproduction, and the health of a population. Now, antidepressants are the best studied. We study with researchers from Sweden. And so as a fish exposed to an antidepressant has an increase in activity and feeding, decreases in sociability, an increase in boldness, so they take more risks, and their movement rates increase, so they migrate faster, and it all one way or the other leads to lower survival rates. So here's a figure of a study in a lake where perch were either exposed or not exposed in the lab to an anti-anxiety drug, and then placed in a lake with a predator. And they were affixed with acoustic tracking devices. So we'll pay attention mostly to that upper left one, the figure of the lake there. So in a moment, they're going to be released. Red are those fish that were exposed. Yellow are the ones that were not. And what's going to happen? All right, so they introduce them there. And you're going to see these red ones start venturing off. So they don't have the same inclination to school when in the presence of a predator, and even outside the presence of a predator, they're not behaving in a safe manner. They're taking more risks, and we just had one dot disappear, so they are getting predated on more frequently. And so this is sped up. You'll see those yellow ones still stay near the area where they were released, and these red ones are just going all over the lake. So they are being eaten much more frequently than the yellow unexposed fish. Now, to focus on my study, we looked at bonefish, so Beulah vulpes, and we wanted to understand by looking at these fish if pharmaceuticals are a concern for fisheries in South Florida. So bonefish, we have 12 different species, 3 in the Caribbean. They reach about 21 years old. It's a pretty long-lived fish, spawn between November and May. They live in nearshore seagrass habitats and feed on benthic organisms, so shrimp, crabs, toadfish. So this means that they're in close proximity to people, and they're eating organisms that are slow moving and slow growing, not necessarily slow growing, excuse me, but they are remaining in those same areas. Let's see here. Now, Carolyn didn't go into this, but the population of bonefish has decreased dramatically. So these are tournament catch records, and you see that dramatic decrease and then an increase in recent years. So there has been a resurgence in bonefish, but these are of a different size than what we historically find. The recent recovery is encouraging, but what is still troubling is the fact that we don't understand why they disappeared in the first place. So if we, let's say we go to a contaminated lake or seagrass flat and replace all that seagrass that died off, without resolving the issue, that seagrass is just going to die again. So if you don't understand why they disappeared, then there's the fear that they will disappear again. So research and exposure on effects of pharmaceuticals is focused on freshwater systems and rivers. And here's a whole survey of pharmaceuticals throughout the Danube Basin. And for us, we're looking, okay, are they concerned for South Florida fisheries? We asked 4 questions. The first one, are they a problem? And to do this, we sampled 93 bonefish throughout South Florida and analyzed them for 104 different types of drugs. We want to understand if it's a problem everywhere. So we looked at 5 different regions, and these are from Biscayne Bay through the Dry Tortugas. So very urban to up to about 70 miles from the nearest urban center in the Dry Tortugas. We understand how big of a problem. So we took this concept of the therapeutic plasma level. So when you're prescribed a drug, it needs to reach a certain concentration in your bloodstream to actually do something. So we took 1/3 of that threshold and used that as our point of comparison to the concentrations that we're finding to understand, is it actually doing anything? Then we want to understand how they're being exposed. So we look at their food items, mud crabs, pink shrimp, toadfish. In our findings, some more pretty pictures. So are they a problem? Yes. Every single bonefish had a drug. The average was 7. We found 58 different kinds, with the most being blood pressure, antidepressants, and prostate medications. And the effects of having more than one drug is difficult to ascertain. So it's the same reason why your doctor would ask, what else are you taking? I need to know if there's going to be any interactions. And that's what could be happening to these bonefish when they have numerous different types of drugs. Now, is the problem everywhere? Yes. So there were some regional differences, and what was most surprising is that we found it high in both urban and remote areas. So there's previous literature that shows that, okay, it can be detected in offshore areas, cool, but also in remote areas that are heavily impacted by tourism. So in alpine rivers that are very far from urban areas, tourism had a very high impact on the number of pharmaceuticals that were detected there. So that's our suspicion with dry tortugas. Now, is the problem everywhere? So if you look at these dots, each one is one of the regions, and the circles show the percent similarity of their distance to the centroid, which is the center of the distribution. And that's just showing basically that all of the fish from Biscayne Bay are fairly similar to dry tortugas. Those two are similar to Lower Keys, and Key West and Upper Keys are just completely different. So the similarity between these areas seems to be independent of proximity to people. How big of a problem? It's a big one. 56% of the fish had at least one drug that exceeded that threshold. The most ones that exceeded were heart medications, antihistamines, antidepressants. And again, the dry tortugas topped all of them with 93% of fish having an exceedance, which again is surprising. We also looked at the Caribbean. So we found that remote areas, these areas, Bahamas, Belize, Mexico, they also did have high exceedances and numbers of pharmaceuticals. So it's not just isolated to very urbanized areas. This is one fish from Key West that had 16 different drugs in it. So it had 8 different antidepressants that were 10 to 300 times the level that you should have in your bloodstream. Schizophrenia, antidepressant medications, heart medications, and the list kind of goes on from there. Antihistamine, antifungal, stomach, and an opioid codeine. Now, is food a pathway? And it proves that it is a likely pathway of exposure. So you can be exposed through inhalation, water, sediment, or food. And we found almost twice the number of pharmaceuticals in each prey item. So 11 in one prey item versus 7 as the average in bonefish. And there were 3 prey items with 24 different drugs in just that one prey item. So it's quite a few drugs in a single little prey. So they're present in all prey types tested and the same types of pharmaceuticals as in bonefish. So the pharmaceutical threat is real. We found that there's high exposure in bonefish with likely effects. Exposure is far and near from pollution sources. And the fact that exposure is in the prey means it's not just a bonefish problem, but all inshore fisheries, because they feed on the same prey items. So a lot of this is depressing, and I catch myself sometimes potentially ending on a negative note. But the fact of the matter is that in this situation, and with many situations when it comes to the environment, is that ignorance is not bliss. The fact that we know means that we have the ability to change it. So there are ways to fix it. There are additional steps in wastewater treatment that you can add that remove pharmaceuticals that are being used in Sweden and Switzerland, with ozonation being the most cost effective. And we need to make sure that our water can be cleaned and reused. It's much more valuable to us to actually be used when we think about the Everglades that needs water, Biscayne Bay that needs water, rather than ocean outfall or deep well injection. If it were to be cleaned and reused, then it's much more valuable. So rethinking wastewater, as I mentioned, damaging and too valuable, needs to become a safe source of energy, fertilizer, and water. And for Florida, at the very least, we have a very timely situation in that we have a bill that has been put in place and they're allocating funding for clean water. So it's a Clean Waterways Act. And hopefully that this is something that they take in consideration when allocating priorities for cleaning our waterways. So with that, I want to thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate you guys having me here and being interested in listening to our research. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions and just thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing for now to see people's faces if we're chatting, but I can go ahead and share the presentation if need be, if we need to like reference a slide or something.
First of all, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, this still blows my mind.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
It's just, so rather than my making any comments, how about some comments or insights from any of you? Insights or questions?
Yeah. I'd like to thank you, Nick. I'm not only am I a sailboat racer, but I'm also a district commissioner of the sanitary district around a lake, runoff lake in Wisconsin. And we're very concerned about phosphorus, but I also know that we need to be concerned with pharmaceuticals in in the runoff too. We all know, we've heard this story in Chicago about 10 years ago that there were samplings of coho salmon that I think that had pharmaceuticals in them off the coast of Chicago. And I'm not surprised, and I'm very pleased that you have this data because it indicates a couple of things. One is I'm going to make the assumption that natural food supplements, as they pass through the body, don't have a deleterious effect upon bonefish or other game fish for that matter. Which that's one question, is what happens if you're taking a lot of food supplements. I take a lot of food supplements. Everyone you're looking at takes a lot of food supplements. I happen to currently be, after my 5-way bypass, be on no medication whatsoever. So I feel quite holy compared to this study. And I think there's a message that we can carve through, that we happen to be part of the solution in helping people, if they're interested, get off of medication that they don't need to be on, and reduce that medication.
You hit on a couple good points there. I guess I'll start with your last one. You got it exactly right in the fact that we are most certainly overprescribing, and this is like a very multifaceted situation. But like one of the points that I find most interesting is the recommended dosage is all based on the average male, which is, as far as they're concerned, like, I don't know, 200-pound, 5'9" person. And there's quite a few people that are not of that size. So inherently there we are overprescribing. And then I think it's quite a bit easier to pick up a script than maybe it is to do something. And I think we're also inclined as a society to appreciate the magical remedy that popping a pill might be, rather than going for a run or something. And that's just an anecdote. But let's see here. Oh, as far as like other types of supplements, it's difficult to find research on that. As far as like, it's not studied too much. And I imagine if it is something that does have a physiological effect to a human, it's possible that it can still have that same physiological effect to something else. Whether or not that's negative, it's hard to say. But if it's persistent, and if it is excreted, and if it's not removed, which, maybe it's not, it might still be there. We just don't know. I mean, there's likely so much more that is there that we just have not even thought of testing for. But I think the fact that, like, okay, so these natural remedies, they're most likely not an issue, but then there's just so much more that could be. Like I mentioned, we have 300,000 over-the-counter drugs. I don't know how much is being prescribed because that's not checked, that's not recorded. So it's like the scope of the problem is fairly unknown. And when you don't know the scope of a problem, the solution can be difficult. But I keep rambling here. But the solution realistically
so Nick,
is...
let me introduce you to Professor Eleanor Russell. And would you give a little of your background, Al, because I know you've got some information to provide.
I love
is Carolinas.
This is my kind of night. I want to see more fish stories every time we come together. Nick, the work that you're doing is critical to help build the story. I was an ecologist by training, and then did work with water quality in the state of North Carolina and wastewater treatment plants in particular. And so on.
I did my undergrad in North Carolina.
Excuse me?
I did my undergrad at Duke in North Carolina. I
Oh,
don't know
right,
if that's a good or a bad thing for you.
Excellent. Yeah.
It's very polarizing school there.
Yeah, well, I worked over at the Duke Marine Lab for a while. Did you go through there?
I did. Yeah, I studied there.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
But anyway, this idea about biotech, and I always say wastewater treatment plants are biotech. And we look at what we know about bacteria, and now we're getting to this genetic modification stuff. People like Craig Ventnor and all those guys are saying we need to design the bugs in the water treatment to take care of some of these synthetics that are coming through, whether they're plastics or this other stuff. So there's maybe a channel down there that can help us. The combination of all these chemicals like you're talking about, we test them singly, and then we say they're safe, but we don't say they're safe in combination with every other thing that you could be putting into the organism or the environment. So for 40 years, we've been saying, beware, beware, beware. And we've said, don't overprescribe. That's not a new story, about bacterial anti-resistant. So my challenge is talking to people who have these, let's say, brain disorders, anxiety, depression. They are just so wedded to these drugs, and there's so much evidence, like you just said, about running and your diet and things like that can help. But we are fighting a huge fight to move the needle. I want to be hopeful, and I think that's why finding this company for me was so exciting, because I tried to make everything myself. Cleaners, no toxic cleaner. Well, you can't really live that way and do anything else. So we've got to figure out how to keep the society moving, keep the economy going, and yet stay healthy so that there'll be a planet for us to enjoy. So keep doing your work is my thing. I'm so happy that there are people out there still looking at the natural world and saying, flags, flags, fly them.
I appreciate your comments.
Oh, but I will say on the food supplements, I don't think there's an issue there, because it's just food. It would be a organic matter in the water that organisms would run into anyway. So I don't think anybody peeing out too much B12 or resveratrol, that's going to get converted to something else, or fish oil. It's stuff that they would naturally encounter. But we have bacteria that can handle our food supplements.
Yeah, when you're talking about natural stuff there, that makes total sense. I guess when I was thinking of like
contributing to a problem by taking food supplements.
I was thinking of like the broadest way of like, I guess I was incorporating a lot of things in my mind of like, oh, you go to whatever the stores over here that give you who knows what in a pill, which is a remedy. So I think I was straying in the other direction of things, where at non-regulated, which is the opposite of what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, in particular,
but it's just another point there. No, yeah, good point.
Our science team that's working very hard to help people see the way out. I'll turn off my mic now. But anyway, thank you. I love this bunch.
Thank you for your comments.
Right. Yeah. Miss Ann, introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from.
Okay, Ann Westergaard, Greensboro, North Carolina. And when I found Shackley, it was like coming home. But Nick, in about 1943, in State College, Pennsylvania, there was a front page article about the crazy Penn State professor who was alarming people because the fish were dying because of something upstream. And he was just crucified for even bringing this idea that people were putting things in the stream upstream that was affecting the town. And so that was like 80 years ago. This has been a long-term problem that has gotten to be worse, but I'm very pleased to know that you're carrying on the work my dad did back many, many years ago. And I hope they never call you crazy, because that was sort of disturbing to have your father be named a crazy professor at Penn State.
Well, tell you what, we've come a long way since then. I haven't really been called crazy yet, but I mean, I have for other reasons. Maybe not this one yet. But what's encouraging is like I mean, the fact that I'm sitting here right now, guys, talking to you guys, it's been really well received. Like we first released this information in February, and we're still getting news coverage. It was on CNN this weekend, and a bunch of other news outlets are reaching out. So it's encouraging that it is, I think, a neat little tricky tool to get somebody to care about water and wastewater. If you start talking about like an algae bloom or something, if you don't care about the environment and you're not swimming, you'd be like, it doesn't matter. But if you're telling them that fish are on drugs and everything else is, that's a little bit more alarming. You don't have to know anything about the environment to understand that you probably don't want a fish that you're potentially eating to be drugged or have 24 different drugs if you're eating a shrimp. So it's been a very encouraging thing to see that I am still talking about it 4 months after releasing the first results. And it's still making its rounds in the media. So I think that's something to be encouraged by, that we're having this conversation, and I'm having a couple more next week. The emails keep coming in because people are interested, which is very cool.
Nick, would you expand geographically, because you and like Betsy and I are all South Florida, so we understand this geography, but I don't see any of our other Northwest people, but I know some of the team from the Northwest and state of Washington talked about that this is a conversation up there in the waters up there. And you mentioned, didn't you mention the Danube River, and that there's virtually no place on the planet that is not impacted by this? Would you just say some more about that? It's not just, this is Florida. That happened to have been where I am, where you are, but would you say some more about that?
No, yeah, it's everywhere. It's a very succinct answer to, I guess, a complicated question, is that it is everywhere. It was everywhere the year after certain drugs were created. It's one of the most common anti-anxiety drugs. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the common name, but it's carbamazepine. That drug was created, and within a couple months, it was in the Baltic Sea, and it's in the sediment, and it's been detected at every single place that it's been sampled since it was created in the Baltic Sea, the year it was created. So it's literally everywhere. Water connects everything, right? And then
I just
terrestrial.
Got an idea. All these things cause you to be aggressive, right? You said the fish became more aggressive. They swam faster.
Yeah, more aggressive or bolder.
We all have too much of this compound in our bodies, and that's why we can't have civil discourse anymore. Just figured that out. Thank you.
There we go. And now I know why everyone's crazy.
Yeah, you don't even have to do the research on that. We got to figure it out.
And then I see Joan there with a hand, so I'll say one more thing. So we tested South Florida, and then this summer we're expanding to the entire state of Florida. So we're testing 9 different estuaries throughout Florida, and we're going to be looking at red drum, so redfish, for 2 main reasons. One, when we went to Tallahassee to talk to legislators, we realistically were only reaching, let's say, 2 to 4 senators and however many congressmen that is, because bonefish are only in 2 counties. So the other ones were like, oh, it's interesting. I like to fish. I catch redfish. And so it's lost on a lot of people. So now we're testing red drums. It's in every single county. And then it's also something that people eat, because bonefish are not eaten. So that's our next step. And as far as everywhere else, I'm getting emails from people in Maine and from all over the place that are seeing this and going like, oh, something else is going on here. Let's chat about it. But yeah, I see that hand that's been raised patiently over there, Joan.
Well, my question, I have a couple questions. One was, in your talk, thank you very much, by the way, the information was profound. You talked about there's nothing that we know of to do yet to dispose of that before it goes into the waterway. So, excuse me, do you have any ideas of how you can do that? Maybe something that, along with a prescription, a person gets something that they put in their toilet that will neutralize the effects of whatever's left from their pharmaceutical. Yeah, have you been working on that? And then I had one other question. Shoot, it was something you just said.
I can start on that one if it gives you a moment to think of it. So yeah, that's like something I think I started thinking about 3 years ago, maybe like 3 days into starting this project. I mean, before I started this, I didn't put much thought at all into what happened with my drugs after I was done using them. You kind of think that you throw something down the toilet, well, awesome, it's going to go through wastewater treatment, everything should be fine. And I feel guilty, but at the same time, I'm a little disappointed that I didn't know any better as far as like, why wasn't I informed that wasn't a be all end all? So then looking into it, like from my perspective is like studying this, no one really knows what to do, right? So there is a product that I see at some pharmacies where it is a powder that you put into the pill bottle, fill the pill bottle up with water, and that's supposed to render it not usable to a certain extent, or maybe it's just discouraging kids from going in the medicine cabinet, but it's still a drug. So there's that. And then the idea, looking into a little bit of research that was seeing like all the different ways that we could reduce pharmaceuticals getting into the environment. There could be take back programs where you bring it to a pharmacy and they dispose of it. And so when you send out a survey, 70% of people are like, absolutely, I'd love to do that. And then when you do it, it's like about 4% of people that actually do it. So no one does it. And then it sounds all well and good, but then when you start doing that, let's say it does reduce to a certain extent, but only 4% of people are using it. And then it also increases fossil fuel emissions exponentially. And let's say, what are they going to do with it once they have it? If it's the most effective way would be taking it to like an incinerator, is if you're only thinking about drugs entering the environment, but then you're increasing carcinogenic emissions by like over 1,000%, and you're increasing all this other stuff. So that's not a solution. The best and most effective way, let's say, would be to denature it with that water and then put it into a landfill. That would keep it probably least likely to enter in the environment. And I misspoke. I said best. That is the easiest as far as, let's say, not investing anything right now, but the best way. So when it comes down to it, there's like a number of different barriers, and it really all ends up on wastewater treatment. So whether or not you're dumping your pills in a toilet when you're not using them, whether you're taking them and you're peeing them out, it all still has to go through the same barrier, and that barrier is wastewater treatment. So if it's going to a septic system, cool. If that's not going to work, and that's something we're working on here in South Florida, but wastewater treatment.
Yeah, so if you could get these designed bacteria to pre-treat it before it goes into the other system, I think that could be really interesting.
Yeah, septic systems, like something needs to be, or the mechanism of a septic system is just, it can't take care of these different
unless
compounds.
There's a pre-treat step, if there's a tank before it gets to the septic tank. I think Bill Gates was working on some stuff down this line at one point. But can I ask another question?
Yep. Yeah, we're real close to closing.
All right, come back and see us again.
Yes, yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, would you like to throw in some comments or do any input from you?
I'd be curious, Nick, where are you hoping to get published?
We're likely going to publish about 5 different papers, and we're looking at chemisphere, science of the total environment. What's kind of funny is the fact that we have disseminated some of this into the media precludes us from certain journals. They don't want anyone to know about it before it's published. So despite being very impactful research, we can't quite shoot for the stars per se, but chemisphere, science of the total environment, mostly ecotoxicological related ones, since those are a little bit more widely disseminated than if I were to just write for a fish biology one. It doesn't have as high of an impact. But that's really what we're shooting for. And that's this summer is what I'm finishing writing and analyzing everything. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, good luck on that. It's too bad that precludes you, because it sure would be good to have it on some media outlets, which is really where the impact would probably be.
I like to think it's close to like Nature Communications caliber, but they would never accept it.
Yeah.
But we made a very loud presence in Florida and in the media, and I think that's more important than having a higher impact journal on my resume. So
yep, absolutely, good job.
Yeah,
but you're barking up against a powerhouse. That
exactly.
pharma is huge.
It is huge. So I would say, I hope I'm not fighting them. That's not the goal. That would be a lost cause.
But their products.
That could be an opportunity for them to do research and come up with some solutions.
I'd wish for that, but like the cynic in me is, if they're not mandated to do it, which they're not going to spend the money on it. There's no regulations. That's part of it. Like, our system is a little bit broken in that we do have the EPA and they do fantastic things, but everything that the EPA does to regulate chemicals, pharmaceuticals don't fit in any of those categories. You can't assess whether or not a pharmaceutical is dangerous based on 50% mortality, which is what they use for other contaminants, because the pharmaceuticals aren't killing anything. So it's like we need to rewrite some of how we assess chemicals for something to be done. Because like, if they don't have the legal obligation, then they're not going to do anything. That's kind of where we're at right now, right? And it's pretty neat. You read some literature. There's some researchers, like some of the first times they've ever used behavioral alterations of a drug to actually help regulate contaminants was with bees. So when they noticed that bee behavior, because bees weren't dying, but they were behaving completely oddly in certain scenarios and they weren't pollinating, they used that as grounds for regulating a chemical. So moving in the right direction for alternative ways of assessing safety. But until we have like mandates, the cynic in me is just like, oh man, we have to go a different avenue. I think it's, when you're a passionate person and you get enough passionate people involved and you start chatting with representatives, that seems to be the better pathway here and encouraging more research. So I'm trying to have a loud voice at the moment and see how far it can go.
But basically, you're saying to us that any fish that you eat already has pharmaceuticals in it. And since a lot of people eat fish and shrimp and crab, that might be your way. Hey guys, you're always eating this, whether you
exactly. Where the research stands right now, as far as studies looking at drinking water, which is also in that, no surprise, and fish, the like concentrations that are immediately in that fish aren't like an immediate risk. Let's say for you to eat enough to actually have a dose in your blood to do something, you'd be eating more than you can actually feasibly do. But then that's not the real point. Let's say you were to be eating a small dose your whole life for 30, 40 years. You don't really understand or know what that does. But, history tells that sometimes it doesn't seem like it's doing anything, but it actually is. So we'll find out, I guess, when I'm 70, whether or not something was happening from all that fish I've been eating. So that's the one thing to think about. It's like, we just don't know, and that's disconcerting.
Well, Nick, I want to especially thank you. I think everybody here is, let's give a huge thanks to you for generously donating your time tonight. And, our mandate for us is back to the single word, why? Why are we doing what we're doing? We're an organization of education to give people some alternatives and some choices. And I just think this is a powerful story. And I really appreciate your taking your time tonight. And shucks, we could do this all again and have as many more questions again. So yeah. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys for being interested. I appreciate it.
You bet. You bet.
And for everything you guys do as well. It's nice to be in a virtual room with some passionate individuals about something that I think is a worthy cause.
You got it. Well, thanks, Nick. You and I will
have a great evening, everybody, and we'll be in touch.